Well, it's the final week of the semester, folks, and we're really in the thick of it. You have 2 assignments to finish up, and then you'll be finished with the course. The first of which is the safety fact sheet, which I have provided feedback on if you've submitted that. And so I just want to say a couple of words about that assignment first. For the most part, folks did a really nice job. I was really impressed with the quality of the research in particular. Most people did a really nice job of finding credible, current, relevant sources, and so that's a real achievement. It's hard to write anything well if you don't have good material, and it seemed like most people knocked that part of the assignment really out of the park. The 2 types of feedback that I found myself giving to most folks sounded like this. 1, limit the amount of text that you use. And so I'll give you a little bit of a background of the genesis of this particular assignment. I was actually consulting or doing a little bit of professional development instructing at Central Maine Power, and I was working with their safety coordinators, and they had to routinely, on a rotation, produce these safety briefs. And these were short documents that were read by the crew that sort of, brought to light or reminded folks of really important safety-related issues, safety or health-related issues, and they were produced by the supervisors and consumed by the actual folks who work in the field. And what we were finding was that folks weren't reading them or taking them seriously, or if they were, they didn't understand what they were reading or its significance. And so, I really thought that this would be a great assignment to teach in the class because it requires you to do a number of things really well. The first of which, and what I just commented on that most of you have done really well, is find really good information. So to give you an example, if you were a safety coordinator at Central Maine Power, you might write a safety brief about rotator cuff injuries and their prevalence among line workers. And so you might remind folks, what the rotator cuff is, what it does, but more importantly, sort of how the rotator cuff is used in line working work and the particular hazards, the very job-specific hazards that are faced by line workers relative to their shoulders and their rotator cuffs. So it's not just a general encyclopedia entry about the rotator cuff. It's a very specific, targeted document that's really aimed at their audience, which is fellow line workers. And so that was one of the things that I found myself saying to a lot of folks on this assignment is make sure that you're writing to your audience. You're not just writing about a particular thing. You're not just writing about trips and falls, for instance. You're writing about trips and falls in a particular workplace. So what do trips and falls look like for medical professionals? Or what do they look like in the electrical field? And what are the specific hazards and what are the specific preventative measures you can take? So keep that in mind that you really want to be hyper-specific about this because the reality is, and this is part of my theory, this is why OSHA materials don't get read, is that if you're too general and you try to cast too wide of a net and you try to speak to too many different types of workers, they're not going to read it because they don't find that it's relevant to them or it's just too basic. And so in your safety fact sheet, I really want to remind you and encourage you to be very specific. The other thing is just limit the amount of text. And so really just try, and this is also related to your audience, just try to communicate more with less. And so try to eliminate redundancy, try to collapse sentences, try to use bulleted lists, try to use images if you can. Because the reality of the situation and the thing that we found out at Central Maine Power is that folks generally don't read stuff if it looks like it's time intensive because they have other things to do. Frankly, other things that they deem more important, even though we know that safety is super important. So what you have to do, and this is something that technical writers deal with all the time, is that you have to economize your writing and you have to make your writing look inviting. So if somebody picks something up and they see this big dense wall of text that's not divided in any particular way, they're not going to read it. And we've been talking about this all semester, but I want to remind you on your fact sheet, this is of particular importance. And so you really have to think about, again, this goes back to my metaphor of being an architect, you really have to think about how you want to design that information on that document so that somebody can read it and easily navigate it. So I've given each of you feedback on what that might look like for you, but those are just some key reminders that on those really quick-hitting type documents, fact sheets, brochures, anything like that, you really want to keep those 2 things in mind. You want to keep in mind your specific audience, and you want to keep in mind your economy of words, and that should put you in a pretty good spot. And now we're going to move into our final assignment of the semester, which you've probably just begun to read and start to understand, but I want to give you sort of the Cliffs Notes version, and then I want to give you some of the things that I'm hoping I'll see in this and some of the things that I hope you'll get a chance to practice. So this is a recommendation report, and this is sort of the culmination, the capstone assignment in the class. And your goal in this assignment really is to go out and solve a problem for somebody. So I've given you a list of scenarios. You don't have to use those scenarios. You're more than welcome to come up with something on your own. But I've tried to touch on a variety of fields and a variety of domains of expertise. But effectively what you're going to do is you're going to read the scenario. So the first one is The superintendent of schools has asked you to write a report recommending the best tablet for 7th and 8th graders because they won a grant. The school district won a grant. So what you're going to do is you're going to produce a report, and you're going to come up with 3 viable options of all the tablets that are out there. You're going to identify the 3 best ones, and then you're going to do sort of a side-by-side comparison, and you're going to recommend which one is the best. So in so doing, there's a few things that you're going to have to do. First and foremost, and we just talked about this, is that you're going to have to write in a really audience-centered way. You may be in an IT program, you may be in applied electronics, computer technology, and you may talk the talk of gigabytes and RAM and pixels and retina displays and all this type of stuff. But frankly, to a superintendent of schools, that means nothing. And so the key is that you have to tie it back to the way that that person sees the world. So what is the lens that they bring to the world? What are the things that they care about? How are they going to approach this document? What preoccupations are they going to have? What expectations do they have? And so it's pretty safe to say that when you're superintendent of schools, you are concerned with a few things. Probably first and foremost is like the safety and well-being of your students. You want to make sure that they're not doing things that they shouldn't be. So that's going to be a prominent part of your report when you're recommending a tablet. That would manifest itself in terms of like security and parental controls and those types of things. You're probably also concerned with cost, making sure that these things are cost-effective and that they're sustainable and those types of things. And then, probably really up there on the list is student success and how well this is actually going to help teaching and learning in the classroom. So what this is going to force you to do is really think about your criteria. And so there are a million things that we could write about tablets. But there are probably only a handful of things, maybe half a dozen things that really matter to a superintendent of schools, right? And so we really want to hone in on those things. What are the things that on the ground are going to matter most to them? Some of the engineering and some of the technical specifications may or may not matter as much. And so you want to think, but some of them will. So something like the battery and the quickness of the charge, it's probably going to matter because you're probably going to want a tablet that's going to last the entire school day. But there are certainly going to be other things that maybe don't matter as much. And I'll let you be the decider on that. So first and foremost, you want to write in an audience-centered way, because this is an assignment where you can really get carried away. You can go out, especially if you're researching something like a vehicle, you could go out and you could do a tremendous amount of research about that vehicle, about the climate control settings, about the Bluetooth connectivity. But if it's a work truck, those things probably don't matter as much. Maybe they do, and maybe you can compel me to think that they do, but there's probably other things that matter a little bit more, like the cost to own and operate, the fuel economy, the storage capacity, the comfort of the hauling a crew or whatever it is. So be audience-centered. The second thing that you're really going to have to sort of navigate in this assignment is where you're getting your information from. So you want to have really good, credible, reputable, verifiable, fact-based information. So you don't want to be just regurgitating marketing speak. You want to be sort of interpreting that, and you don't want to just be going to a website that's trying to sell you something and using that same information, because they're going to be using all this sort of proprietary language that may or may not mean anything. And so I want you to keep that in mind. So you got to find high quality information. You want to compare apples to apples too. So you want to be trying to use comparable types of information, and you don't want to be all over the map. So people want to see a consistent methodology. They want to see that you're applying the same sort of lens to each option. So I want you to keep that in mind also. From a document design perspective, you're really going to want to create a document that allows this reader to solve their problem. And so what I'm asking you to do is to create a series of sort of compartments to put information in, one of which is the executive summary. And I'll tell you right now, the Cliffs Notes version of an executive summary is, in fact, it is the Cliffs Notes. It is a very condensed version of the report itself. And it kind of has snippets of each of the sections, so that somebody could literally just read the executive summary and get the gist or the overview of the entire document. And so that's important. So you're going to have to write one of those. And the other thing that you really want to do is you want to create an experience where somebody can really compare, where somebody can see the options side by side. And so you're going to have to think about how you do that. And so you're going to have to break this document up into segments or into sections, and then you're going to have to think about what the best way to present information is. There's really 2 fundamental ways that you can approach this. You can do it option by option, so you can provide all of the specifications about the Ford F-150, and then the Dodge Ram, and then the Chevy Silverado, for instance. You could do that. There's some advantages and disadvantages of that depending on what your particular scenario is. Or you could do it criteria by criteria, so you could look at towing capacity, compare them. You could look at fuel economy, compare them. You could look at cost to own and operate, compare them. And so I'll let you determine that, but that's something that you really always want to think about when you are writing a report is what's the best way to present the information, because fundamentally a report is not only document where somebody reads and makes a decision, but it's also a reference document that somebody can go back to and pull information from. So you want to think about how you sort of compartmentalize things in a logical and a useful way. So again, that'll be up to you. And then the final thing is that you're going to have to make a recommendation, and so you're going to have to make a really well-reasoned, audience-centered, evidence-based recommendation. So effectively, you're going to make a claim. You're going to say, for instance, the iPad is the best tablet for 7th and 8th graders. Okay, that's your claim, and then you're going to have to leverage, based on your research, based on all those comparisons, you're going to have to put together for that person a cogent, coherent, evidence-supported conclusion. And so that's going to require you to look back, and again, so one of the things I want you to think about is that not all of these criteria are created equally. So usually readers come to a document with a set of priorities or sort of a hierarchy of needs, and you need to anticipate that. So what do you think is most important for the person who is installing a heating system into their garage? What do you think is most important for the superintendent trying to get tablets for their students? Because not everything is going to be created equally. Certain things are going to be weighed more than others, and it's your job, sort of in this report, to indicate which ones are of the highest or the most importance, and then also use that to reason through your recommendation. So if there, a tablet or a truck or a piece of equipment stands out in one area that's really important, then you need to re-emphasize that in your conclusion so that somebody can read it and feel confident, because these types of reports where you're asked to help make a decision, and sometimes it's about a piece of equipment, sometimes it's about a piece of property, sometimes it's about a personnel member. When you make these decisions, they have pretty significant consequences, and so somebody reading this report would want to feel really confident that the recommendation that you're making is credible and that it's logical. And so it's your job in that final recommendation section to really put those pieces together. And I find that students typically just sort of gloss over that recommendation section, but really spend some time, because that's where you have to sort of connect the dots, put the pieces together, and make sure that folks understand where you're coming from. So the final thing I'll say is this, is make sure that your reader understands the criteria that you're using. So for instance, if you're writing scenario 1 about tablets, you probably want a tablet that is able to run software and to store things and to do those types of things. And there are technical specifications that relate to that, like RAM and hard disk space. But don't just assume that your reader knows what that is. So if you're using a criteria, make sure that your reader knows the significance of it. So you could say, for instance, RAM. You could even give them the definition. It stands for random access memory or whatever it stands for, but effectively it's how well the computer can multitask. And that's important in a classroom because folks can switch from subject to subject, or they can switch from task to task easily without having to wait for the computer to load, and those types of things. So again, back to the first thing I said, you really got to hone in on the audience, and you got to tailor everything that you do to the audience. Why does this matter to this particular audience? Why does this matter to this person? Why does it matter to this context? And that's really what good technical writing is all about, and that's something we've been practicing all semester in all of our assignments, whether it was the fact sheet, whether it was the resume and cover letter, whether it was the technical review. We're really trying to be context specific. When we write generally or when we write sort of abstractly, it's not nearly as useful. So that's what your recommendation report effectively is, and I'll be posting some examples of that here this morning. And you can take a look at those, draw some inspiration from them. But there's really innumerable ways, infinite ways that you could sort of approach this assignment. I've seen every conceivable thing, and that's sort of the fun part about this assignment. But I realize it's also probably the thing that daunts students the most, is that I don't tell you how it has to be formatted exactly. And so that's entirely up to you. The goal is to produce a document that somebody could read, understand, and make a decision from. So I'll leave you with that. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. Thanks.